Next, I will continue with the International Tonnage Convention 1969, commonly known as ITC 1969, and its application within Malaysia's maritime legal framework. Before ITC 1969, most countries used the older register tonnage system, mainly GRT, register tonnage, and NRT, net register tonnage. GRT measured the ship's internal volume, where 1 register ton equals 100 cubic feet, while NRT was calculated after deducting non-earning spaces such as engine room, fuel spaces, crew accommodation, and other non-cargo spaces. However, because each country had different rules, deductions, and exemptions, the same ship could have different tonnage in different countries, causing confusion, unfair port dues, different canal charges, and design loopholes. For example, bulky but light cargo such as cotton required large cargo space, and some old rules did not always measure the ship's true earning capacity fairly. Therefore, ITC 1969 introduced a standard international system using gross tonnage, GT, and net tonnage, NT, based on the ship's molded volume and cargo spaces, so ship size and earning capacity could be measured more consistently and fairly worldwide. To solve this problem, ITC 1969 introduced a single unified international system for measuring ships based on internal volume. This means that a ship's size can be recognized consistently, whether it is registered in Japan, Norway, Malaysia, or any other contracting state. The main purpose of ITC 1969 is to establish a uniform method for tonnage measurement, to define standardized formulas for gross tonnage, GT, and net tonnage, NT, and to ensure fairness and transparency in how ships are charged, certified, and regulated internationally. Gross tonnage represents the overall size of the ship, while net tonnage reflects the useful capacity of the ship. Therefore, ITC 1969 is important because tonnage is not only a technical measurement, but also a legal and administrative tool used in ship registration, port dues, safety certification, and international maritime compliance. The International Tonnage Convention 1969 came into force internationally on the 18th of July 1982. According to Article 17 of ITC 1969, the convention would come into effect 24 months after 25 governments of states, whose combined merchant fleets represent 65% of the gross tonnage of the world's merchant shipping, had signed or deposited instruments of acceptance or accession in accordance with Article 16. Malaysia ratified the convention on the 24th of April 1984, and it entered into force in Malaysia on the 24th of July 1984. After that, ITC 1969 became part of Malaysia's national maritime legal framework through the Merchant Shipping Ordinance 1952 and the Merchant Shipping Tonnage Regulations 1985, PUA 83, 1985. Next, the scope and application of the convention are provided under Article 4 of ITC 1969. According to Article 4, the convention does not apply to ships of war and ships less than 24 meters in length. This 24-meter threshold is important because it separates smaller domestic craft from larger vessels involved in international trading operations. For ships that are 24 meters and above, ITC 1969 applies fully, meaning these ships must be measured, certified, and documented according to the convention's formula. Malaysia follows the same principle under the Merchant Shipping Tonnage Regulations 1985. Under Malaysia's tonnage framework, vessels measuring 24 meters and above in registered length are issued the International Tonnage Certificate, ITC 1969. This certificate is issued in accordance with the International Convention on Tonnage Measurement of Ships, 1969, and it confirms the ship's standardized gross tonnage, GT, and net tonnage, NT. These values are normally expressed as whole numbers, such as 112 GT without decimal points. The certificate ensures that larger ships are measured according to internationally recognized IMO standards and can be accepted for registration, port dues, regulatory compliance, and international operations. In contrast, vessels measuring less than 24 meters in registered length are issued the Malaysia Tonnage Certificate, MTC, under Malaysia's national tonnage system. The MTC is designed mainly for smaller vessels operating within Malaysian jurisdiction and not required to comply with the International Tonnage Convention. Unlike the ITC system, the MTC may include decimal-based gross register tonnage, GRT, such as 112.01 GRT, reflecting the traditional measurement method used for smaller craft under national rules. Therefore, both the International Tonnage Certificate, ITC, and the Malaysia Tonnage Certificate, MTC, are incorporated within the Merchant Shipping Tonnage Regulations 1985, but their application depends mainly on the vessel's registered length threshold of 24 meters. The Malaysian legal foundation for tonnage is further supported by the Merchant Shipping Ordinance 1952, or MSO 1952. Under the MSO 1952, the regulation of tonnage certificates forms an important part of Malaysia's ship registration, safety compliance, certification, and enforcement system. The ordinance first establishes the legal meaning of tonnage in its interpretation provisions, where tonnage refers to the net registered tonnage of Malaysian ships or the equivalent certified tonnage of foreign ships. This provides a consistent statutory basis for applying maritime regulatory requirements in Malaysia. Thereafter, Sections 20 and 21 of the MSO 1952 require that a ship's tonnage must be surveyed, measured, and certified by a surveyor of ships before registration. The resulting certificate of measurement must then be submitted to the registrar as a prerequisite for issuing the certificate of registry. This shows that tonnage is not only a technical figure, but also a legal requirement for the registration of a ship. Without proper tonnage measurement and certification, a ship cannot be properly registered under the Malaysian shipping framework. Tonnage also plays an important role in determining registration eligibility and financial obligations. Under Section 25 of the MSO 1952, tonnage operates as a regulatory threshold for entry into the Malaysia International Ship Register. Meanwhile, Section 28 links tonnage directly to the payment of registration fees and annual tonnage fees. This demonstrates that tonnage has both administrative and financial significance because it affects whether a ship can be registered and how much the ship owner must pay in fees. The MSO 1952 also uses tonnage as a control mechanism in operational regulation. Under Section 54, vessels below 15 net tonnage engaged in trade, passenger carriage, or recreational activities must obtain licenses. Under Section 65, annual tonnage fees contribute to the Malaysia Shipping Development Fund, supporting national maritime development. In addition, Sections 68Q and 68U empower the minister to prescribe regulations on the ascertainment of tonnage, while ships below 15 net tonnage may be exempted from certain domestic shipping requirements. These provisions show that tonnage helps determine how ships are regulated, licensed, and managed within Malaysian waters. Tonnage is also important in deciding whether major international safety and labor standards apply to a ship. For example, Section 116 of the MSO 1952 applies certification requirements to ships of 500 gross tonnage and above. Similarly, Section 249 AD extends safe operation obligations to cargo ships and offshore units of 500 gross tonnage or more. Under Section 268A, ships of not less than 500 gross tonnage engaged on international voyages must obtain prescribed cargo ship safety construction certificates. These provisions show that tonnage acts as a legal threshold for applying international safety certification and operational standards. The connection between tonnage and load line compliance can also be seen under Section 307 of the MSO 1952. This section classifies ships subject to load line regulations according to tonnage thresholds, such as 150 gross tonnage, confirming the central role of tonnage in determining compliance with international load line requirements. In addition, Section 448 requires vessels of 75 tons gross tonnage and above entering port signaling distance to display proper identification flags and signals. This reinforces tonnage as a basis for port control and operational obligations. Compliance with tonnage certification requirements is supported by enforcement provisions under the MSO 1952. Under Section 512, courts may impose fines for offenses committed under the ordinance. In addition, Section 512A authorizes the Director of Marine to compound offenses by accepting payment of up to 50% of the maximum prescribed fine before prosecution is instituted. These enforcement provisions show that tonnage certification is not optional. It is legally enforceable and forms part of Malaysia's wider maritime compliance system. Next, it is useful to compare the definitions under the International Load Lines Convention, or ILLC, and the International Tonnage Convention 1969, or ITC 1969. Both conventions share several similar definitions, but their purposes are different. The ILLC focuses on ship safety, stability, and safe loading through load line requirements, while ITC 1969 focuses on measuring a ship's size and capacity through tonnage calculation. Firstly, both the ILC and ITC define new ship in a similar way under Article 2, Section 6. A new ship means a ship whose keel is laid, or which is at a similar stage of construction on or after the date the convention comes into force for each contracting government. Secondly, both conventions also define existing ship under Article 2, Section 7. An existing ship means a ship that is not a new ship, which generally refers to a ship built before the convention came into force. Thirdly, both conventions define international voyage, the ILLC 1966 under Article 2, Section 4, and ITC 1969 under Article 2, Section 3. An international voyage means a sea voyage from a country to which the convention applies to a port outside that country, or vice versa. Fourthly, both conventions also provide a definition of length under Article 2, Section 8. According to the ILLC, length is measured as 96% of the total length on a waterline at 85% of the least molded depth measured from the top of the keel or from the foreside of the stem to the axis of the rudder stock on that waterline, whichever is greater. ITC 1969 also uses a similar concept of length for tonnage measurement. However, the ILLC applies this measurement mainly for load line determination, while ITC 1969 uses it for tonnage classification and certification. However, some definitions are unique to ITC 1969. Under ITC Article 2, Section 4, gross tonnage means the overall size of a ship, measured in accordance with the convention's provisions. The ILLC does not directly define gross tonnage because its main purpose is not to measure ship size, but to regulate safety through load lines. Gross tonnage is central to ITC 1969 because it affects ship registration, port fees, regulatory thresholds, and international classification. Similarly, under ITC Article 2, Section 5, net tonnage refers to the measure of the useful capacity of a ship, excluding non-cargo spaces, such as the engine room. The ILLC does not define or regulate net tonnage because it is primarily concerned with safe loading, freeboard, and stability. This distinction shows that ITC 1969 focuses on the ship's measurable capacity, while the ILLC focuses on the ship's safety when loaded and operating at sea. In summary, the International Load Lines Convention and the International Tonnage Convention 1969 share several important definitions, including new ship, existing ship, international voyage, and length. However, they differ in their main purpose. The ILLC regulates ship stability and safe loading through load line requirements, while ITC 1969 provides a uniform international method for measuring gross tonnage and net tonnage. Although the two conventions deal with different aspects of maritime law, they complement each other by creating a safer, fairer, and more standardized system for international shipping. Overall, the tonnage certificate under the Merchant Shipping Ordinance 1952 and the Merchant Shipping Tonnage Regulations 1985 is not merely a measurement document. It is a central statutory instrument that affects ship registration eligibility, licensing requirements, safety certification, load line compliance, financial obligations through tonnage fees, and enforcement through penalties. Therefore, ITC 1969 and Malaysia's tonnage framework play an important role in ensuring that ships are measured consistently, regulated fairly, and operated in compliance with both national and international maritime standards.
Thank you for watching. See you next time.